Vanessa Hale grabbed the wine glass off the table and laughed. Loud, sharp, the kind of laugh designed to be heard. "Is that your ex-wife serving tables over there?" she said, loud enough that the couple at the next table turned their heads. "My God, Damien, how far she's fallen!" Damien Cross said nothing. He couldn't. Because across the restaurant, Claire Bennett had just looked up. Their eyes locked for exactly 2 seconds. And what he saw in her face wasn't embarrassment. It was exhaustion, the deep, hollow kind that comes from carrying something too heavy, alone, for far too long. And that's when he noticed her stomach. If this story hits you in a place you didn't expect, drop a like, leave a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The reservation had been Vanessa's idea. Aurelius, the kind of restaurant that didn't put prices on the menu because if you had to ask, you already didn't belong there. Dress code enforced. Reservations booked 6 weeks out. The sort of place that made a certain kind of person feel like they had finally arrived somewhere important. Damien Cross had been to Aurelius twice before and found it exhausting both times. The chairs were too stiff. The portions were the size of a business card. The lighting made everyone look like they were auditioning for something, but Vanessa loved it, and Damien had learned, over 11 months of dating her, that keeping the peace was sometimes easier than explaining why he didn't care about Michelin stars or wine pairings or whether the tablecloth was Egyptian cotton. So he wore the dark navy suit she had picked out. He made small talk in the car. He held the door open when they arrived. He was doing everything right. That was the thing about Damien Cross. He was very, very good at doing everything right on the outside. Eat. The restaurant was full that Thursday evening, corporate dinners at the big round tables near the windows, a birthday party in the private alcove in the back, the kind with expensive balloon arrangements and a cake that cost more than most people's car payments, couples leaning toward each other across candlelight, performing romance for each other and for anyone watching. Damien and Vanessa were seated near the center of the room. Vanessa's preference. She liked to see and be seen. She was wearing a black dress that she had mentioned 3 separate times, cost more than his first car, which he suspected was meant to make him feel something, though he was never entirely sure what. The menus arrived. The sommelier appeared. Vanessa began talking about a property she had toured that afternoon. Something about 12-foot ceilings and a chef's kitchen and a neighborhood that was finally becoming what it was always supposed to be, which Damien understood to mean expensive people were moving in and everyone else was moving out. He nodded at the right intervals. He asked the right questions. He reached across the table and touched her hand exactly once, which seemed to satisfy her. This was the architecture of their relationship. Polished surfaces, correct gestures, a kind of companionship that looked from the outside like happiness. Damien was good at architecture. He'd spent the last 8 years building things that looked exactly like what people expected them to look like. He was 39 years old, and he had mastered the performance of his own life. He saw her when he was reaching for his water glass, just a flicker of motion in his peripheral vision. A server moving between tables, navigating the room with the careful, practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to be invisible. He wouldn't have looked twice, wouldn't have registered her at all, except something made him look up, and the world went very, very quiet. Claire. She was wearing the restaurant's standard uniform, black slacks, white button-down, small black apron tied at the waist. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that looked less like a style choice and more like something done quickly in a break room mirror. She was carrying a tray with 2 dessert plates, moving toward the far corner of the room, her eyes tracking the floor, the tables, the path ahead, anywhere but toward him. She hadn't seen him yet. Damien's hand stayed frozen above the water glass. His brain, which was usually good at processing information and producing appropriate responses, did absolutely nothing for several seconds. He just looked. Catalog details he had no business cataloging. The slight adjustment in the way she walked, the way she steadied the tray with her left hand, the curve of her... Damien. Vanessa's voice clipped. He looked back at her. She was watching him with that expression she had, the one that wasn't quite anger yet, but was already measuring the distance to it. "Sorry," he said. "What were you saying?" Her eyes flicked across the room, following the line of his attention with the radar of someone who had learned to watch for exactly this kind of thing. Then she went very still. Then she smiled. That smile. Damien had seen it before. It wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed a weapon they hadn't expected and were already deciding how to use it. "Is that your ex-wife serving tables over there?" She didn't lower her voice. She didn't try to. The couple at the next table looked up. One of them, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and good earrings, caught Damien's eye for just a moment before looking politely away. "Vanessa." "My God, Damien." Vanessa reached for her wine, still smiling. "How far she's fallen." Across the room, Claire's shoulders tightened. Slightly, barely. But Damien saw it. She had heard. Of course she had heard. The restaurant had the specific acoustics of spaces designed to feel intimate, which meant sound traveled farther than it should. Claire didn't look up. She set the dessert plates down at the corner table, said something brief to the guests there, something professional, something that came with a polite smile Damien didn't recognize, and turned back toward the kitchen. That was when the candle on the table nearest to her caught the light just right, and the angle shifted, and Damien saw. He saw her profile. The slight, unmistakable curve of her stomach beneath the white button-down. The world didn't just go quiet this time. It stopped. Damien Cross was not a man who panicked. He had built a commercial real estate firm from $40,000 and a credit card with a $4,000 limit. He had closed deals in rooms full of men twice his age who were trying to bury him. He had survived a divorce that had cost him more than money, that had taken pieces of him he wasn't sure he would ever locate again. He did not panic, but sitting in that chair, in that restaurant, watching Claire Bennett disappear through the kitchen door with her hand briefly, unconsciously pressed to the side of her stomach, Damien felt something crack open in his chest that he had no language for. 8 months. It had been 8 months since the divorce was finalized, since Claire had signed the papers and walked out of the mediator's office without looking back, without asking for more than what was legally hers, without making it dramatic or prolonged or ugly in the way he had half expected it to be. She had been quiet about the whole thing, dignified in a way that had bothered him more than a fight would have. He had told himself she was fine, she had moved on. Claire was resilient. He knew that better than almost anyone, because he had watched her survive things that would have broken most people, and then watched her stand up and keep moving without complaint. He had used that knowledge to make himself feel better about how everything ended. 8 months, and she was here. Waiting tables. In a restaurant where he was having dinner with the woman he was dating, with a stomach that told a story he wasn't ready to hear. Earth to Damien. Vanessa was watching him with something that wasn't quite amusement anymore. She could read a room. She could read him. It was one of the things he had found attractive about her at the beginning and unsettling about her lately. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "I'm fine." "You're staring at the kitchen door." "I said I'm fine, Vanessa." The sharpness in his voice surprised them both. She sat back. That smile reappeared, thinner this time, recalibrated. "Of course you are," she said, and picked up her menu. He barely tasted the food. He ordered something. He ate some of it. He answered questions and made observations and performed the evening with the same practiced competence he brought to everything. But some part of his mind had detached from the table and was tracking movement in the restaurant with a focus he couldn't switch off. Claire came back out of the kitchen twice. Both times she was working the far section, tables near the windows, nowhere near his. Both times she kept her face forward, her attention on her station, her whole body radiating the specific kind of careful focus that Damien recognized as deliberate avoidance. She knew he was here. Of course she knew. The third time she emerged from the kitchen, she was carrying a tray of water glasses, and she made the mistake, or maybe it wasn't a mistake, maybe it was just human, of glancing toward the center of the room. Their eyes met again. This time it lasted longer than 2 seconds. She looked older than 8 months should have made her. Not older in a bad way, just different, like something had been rearranged behind her eyes. There were shadows under them that weren't there before, and her jaw was set in a way he remembered from the worst parts of their marriage, that expression that meant she was holding something in with everything she had. Then she looked away, set the water glasses down, said something to a table of 4, smiled the smile that didn't reach her eyes. Damien excused himself to use the restroom. He stood in the men's room for 4 minutes and 40 seconds, staring at himself in the mirror, and asked himself a question he had been very carefully avoiding for the last 30 minutes. When exactly was the last time he and Claire... He splashed cold water on his face. He didn't do the math. Not yet. Not here. Not in this bathroom. Not with Vanessa 20 feet away, picking at a creme brulee and watching the room. But the question sat in his chest like a stone. They left at 9:45. Vanessa talked the whole way to the car about the property again, about whether the neighborhood was really as up-and-coming as the agent claimed, about a renovation project her colleague had described at lunch. She was recalibrating. Damien could hear it in the pace of her words, the way she was filling space, steering the evening back toward normal with the conversational skills she was genuinely very good at. He answered her. He carried his half of the exchange. He opened the car door. He drove her home. He said goodnight on her front steps in a way that was warm enough to be acceptable and brief enough to be noticed, and he watched the small tightening around her eyes that told him she had noticed, and he got back in his car. And he sat in the dark for a long time. He thought about Claire's face when their eyes met. Not the humiliation he might have expected to see there. No tears, no anger, nothing that asked anything of him. Just that exhausted, contained steadiness that had always been both her greatest strength and, if he was being honest with himself for the first time in a long while, one of the things he had taken for granted most during their marriage. She wasn't going to come to him, whatever was happening, whatever that curved stomach meant, whatever story the last 8 months contained, Claire Bennett was not going to walk across that restaurant and put it in his hands. She never had. That was the thing. Through all of it, through the long silences and the canceled dinners and the nights he chose the office over her, through the slow erosion of something that used to be real, she had never come to him. She had waited and waited, and eventually stopped waiting in a way so quiet he hadn't fully understood it was happening until the papers were already drawn up. He had told himself, back then, that made it her fault. Sitting in the dark outside Vanessa's apartment, he was no longer sure that story held together the way it used to. He drove back to Aurelius at 10:15. He wasn't planning to. He told himself he was driving, just driving, clearing his head, but his hands knew where he was going before his brain agreed to it, and 20 minutes later he was parked across the street from the restaurant, engine off, watching the light in the windows. The dinner service was winding down. He could see staff moving inside, the specific, efficient bustle of a restaurant preparing to close. Bussers, runners, the host gathering menus. He didn't know what he was going to say. He didn't know if she would speak to him. He didn't even know for certain what he thought he knew. But the stone in his chest had gotten heavier during the drive, and some things, Damien had learned this the hard way, over a career built on the willingness to sit with difficult information. Some things don't get lighter from being left alone. The side door opened at 10:47. Claire came out in a jacket now, her work apron gone, her hair still pulled back. She had a bag on one shoulder and her keys in her hand, and she was moving toward the parking structure on the next block with her head down against the cold. Damien got out of the car. "Claire?" She stopped. She didn't turn around immediately, just stood there on the sidewalk, her back to him, her keys held in a fist at her side. He could see the tension in her shoulders from 20 feet away, the whole body-level resistance of someone who has been bracing for something they knew was eventually coming. Then she turned around. Her face in the streetlight was very still. "Damien," she said. Not a greeting. Not quite an accusation, just his name, said in the tone of someone who had rehearsed several possible responses to this moment and had decided, finally, on the simplest one. He closed the distance between them, stopped about 6 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to give her the room she clearly needed. Up close, the shadows under her eyes were darker. She looked tired in a bone-deep way. And her stomach... He stopped himself from looking down, met her eyes. "How long?" he asked. She knew exactly what he was asking. She didn't answer immediately. The cold air moved between them. Somewhere down the block, a cab horn sounded. 7 months, she said finally. The stone in his chest dropped straight through the floor. 7 months. He did the math this time. There was no avoiding it anymore. He did the math, and he stood very still on that sidewalk while the answer assembled itself in front of him with the quiet, irrefutable finality of arithmetic. "Claire, don't." Her voice was steady. "Don't do whatever you're about to do right now. Don't stand there and look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I owe you an explanation." She shifted the bag on her shoulder, a movement that looked like it cost her something. "You don't get to look at me like that. Not tonight, not here. I'm not—" He stopped, started again. "I just need to know." She looked at him for a long moment. The streetlight caught the line of her jaw, the particular set of her expression that he had seen 100 times across a dining room table, across a courtroom conference room, across the wreckage of 10 years that ended quieter than either of them expected. "Go back to your dinner, Damien," she said. "The dinner's over. Then go back to wherever you came from." She turned and started walking. And Damien Cross, a man who had walked away from difficult things his entire adult life and built a very successful career on knowing exactly when to cut his losses, stood on that sidewalk and watched her go. He didn't leave. He stayed exactly where he was, in the cold, while the city moved around him. The answer to his question was written in the math he had done, in the 7 months she had said, in the look on her face when their eyes had met across the restaurant, a look that wasn't asking him for anything, had never been asking him for anything, and that was somehow the most devastating thing about all of it. He stood there for a long time. He went back the next day. Damien told himself he wasn't going to. He told himself that on the drive home from Aurelius, lying in bed at 2 in the morning staring at the ceiling, and again over coffee at 6 a.m., when the city was still gray and quiet outside his window. He had a 9 o'clock meeting. He had a call at 11 with a contractor whose bid had come in 40% over what they'd agreed on. He had a full calendar and a business that required his attention, and a relationship that was already fragile in ways he hadn't fully examined yet. He had things to do. He went back anyway. He walked into Aurelius at 4:15 in the afternoon during the dead hour between lunch service and dinner prep, when the restaurant was half lit and smelled like cleaning solution, and someone in the kitchen was running a mixer. The host at the door, a young guy with a vest and a practiced smile, looked at him with the polite confusion of someone who understood that the restaurant was closed, but also understood that the man standing in front of him probably had a very high credit limit. "I'm looking for one of your servers," Damien said. "Claire Bennett." The host's expression shifted by a few degrees, not unfriendly, just careful. "We don't typically—" "I know her personally." Damien kept his voice level. "Tell her Damien Cross is here. If she wants me to leave, I'll leave." A pause. Then the host nodded and disappeared toward the back. Damien stood near the door with his hands in his coat pockets and looked around the restaurant in the flat afternoon light. It looked different without the candles and the crowd and the performance of it. Smaller. The chairs were up on most of the tables. Someone had left a coffee cup on the bar. The whole place had the slightly deflated look of a stage set between shows. He heard her before he saw her. The specific sound of her walk, which he had apparently not forgotten the way he had told himself he had. Not a distinctive walk, just a familiar one. Claire came through the kitchen door in her street clothes, jeans, a loose gray sweater, sneakers. Her hair was down. She looked, without the uniform and the professional composure of the night before, like someone who was very tired and not particularly interested in pretending otherwise. She stopped about 10 feet away and crossed her arms. "You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't ask Marcus to show you out," she said. Marcus is the host. He's also 6'2" and used to play college football. 30 seconds, Damien. He hadn't planned a speech. He had driven here without one, and he stood here without one now, which was unusual for him. Damien Cross generally walked into rooms with a plan. It was one of the first things people said about him in business, that he was always 3 moves ahead, always prepared, always controlled. He was none of those things right now. "I just need to talk to you," he said. "That's not a reason. That's a preference." "Claire, don't." She said it the same way she had the night before. That flat, preemptive stop, like a hand on a door. "Don't come in here and say my name like that and expect me to—" "What, exactly? Feel sorry for you? Help you process this? Because I have been processing this for 7 months by myself, and I am working a double shift tonight, and my feet already hurt, so whatever you came here to say it." The bluntness of it landed somewhere near his sternum. This was the version of Claire he had seen rarely during their marriage, and frequently during the divorce. The one without the patience for careful navigation, the one who was done waiting for him to find his way to a point. "Is it mine?" he said. The silence that followed was not comfortable. Claire looked at him for a long moment with an expression that moved through several things in quick succession. Something that might have been disbelief, something that was definitely anger, and then something underneath those that was harder to name. Resignation, maybe. The look of someone who had hoped to be surprised and wasn't. "Yes," she said. Just the one word. No embellishment. No apology for the plainness of it. Something happened to Damien's breathing. He was aware of it. The specific, involuntary disruption of a body reacting to information faster than the mind can process it. He put one hand on the back of a nearby chair and didn't say anything for a few seconds because he genuinely didn't trust what would come out. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Are you serious right now?" "I'm completely serious." "Damien." She said his name differently this time, not as a barrier, but as a measurement, like she was taking the full length of his question and holding it up to the light. "We were divorced. I signed papers in a conference room with a mediator and 2 lawyers, and then I walked out of that building and you didn't call. You didn't text. You didn't check if I was okay. You were on a plane to Denver for a deal closing 3 days later. I know because Marcus at the front desk has a sister who works at your firm." He had nothing to say to that. Mostly because it was accurate. "I found out 6 weeks after the papers were signed," she continued. Her voice was steady in the way of someone who has rehearsed this conversation in their own head many times and has finally gotten the shaking out of it. "And I sat in my bathroom for a long time trying to figure out the right thing to do. And I thought about calling you. I actually picked up my phone 3 times. Why didn't you?" "Because every single time I thought about calling you, I thought about what would happen next." She unfolded her arms, then seemed to not know what to do with her hands, and finally tucked them into the front pocket of her sweater. "You would have come. I know you well enough to know you would have shown up. And then you would have, what? Offered money, made arrangements, taken control of the logistics the way you take control of everything. And then somewhere around month 3 or 4, some deal would close and another one would open, and I would be alone at a doctor's appointment again. And I have already done that, Damien. I did that for 4 years of a marriage. I was not going to do it for 18 years of a co-parenting arrangement." The mixer in the kitchen had stopped. The restaurant was very quiet. "That's not fair," he said. "Maybe not." She met his eyes without flinching. "But it's true. And you know it's true. Which is why you're standing there and not arguing with me." He was standing there and not arguing with her. "You should have told me," he said, because he had to say something, because some part of him needed the ground to be level for just a second. "Probably," she said. "And you should have been a different kind of husband. We can play that game all night if you want, but I have to be back on the floor in 40 minutes and I haven't eaten lunch." She turned to go. "Claire." He didn't know what he meant to say after her name. He said it anyway. "Please." She stopped, didn't turn around right away, just stood there with her hand resting on the back of a chair, and in the flat afternoon light he could see the slight rise and fall of her shoulders, the specific rhythm of someone breathing through something they'd rather not be breathing through. When she turned back, her expression had changed. Not softer exactly. More tired. The anger had burned down to something lower and steadier, something more honest. "What do you want, Damien?" she asked. Not unkindly, just plainly. "Tell me what you actually want from this conversation." He didn't have a good answer ready. He had spent 20 years in business knowing exactly what he wanted from every conversation before it started. And he stood here now in a half-lit restaurant with a woman carrying his child, and he had absolutely nothing prepared. "I want to know you're okay," he said finally. "And I want—" He stopped, started again. "I want to be in this. Whatever this is. I want to be in it." Claire looked at him for a long time. "You should think about what that means before you say it," she said quietly. "Because I have heard that sentence from you before. I have heard variations of it for 10 years, and the sentence was never the problem. The follow-through was." She went back through the kitchen door. He stood in the empty dining room for a minute, maybe 2, surrounded by upturned chairs and the smell of cleaning solution and the specific weight of everything she had not said but meant. Then he let himself out. The cold air outside hit him like a correction. He sat in his car for a long time before he drove away. He called his lawyer the next morning, not to start anything, just to ask a question about rights and obligations and what the legal landscape looked like in a situation that he described in careful, neutral language that his lawyer, who had been around long enough to hear everything, translated correctly and without commentary. The call lasted 20 minutes. He sat with the information afterward and didn't like most of it, not because it was unfavorable to him, but because reducing it to legal language, visitation, financial support, documentation, made the whole thing feel like a contract negotiation, and that was exactly what Claire had predicted he would do. He didn't call his lawyer again. Instead, he called his business partner, Ray Okafor, who had known him since the early days when the firm was 2 people in a shared office space above a dry cleaner on West 44th Street, and who had the specific quality of being someone Damien could say things to without them coming back at him differently later. They had lunch at a diner on Tuesday, the kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that came in actual ceramic mugs, which was Ray's preference and always had been. Ray was 51 years old, had been married to the same woman for 23 years, had 3 daughters and strong opinions about most things, and he listened to the whole story without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When Damien finished, Ray picked up his coffee mug and held it in both hands and looked at the table for a moment. "So, what are you going to do?" he said. "I don't know yet." "Yes, you do." Ray looked up. "You already know. You wouldn't be sitting here telling me this if you didn't already know." "I'm sitting here because I need someone to talk to." "You need someone to tell you you're not crazy for wanting to do the right thing. That's different." Ray set the mug down. "The question is whether you're going to actually do it, or whether you're going to manage it from a distance the way you manage everything else." Damien looked at him. "You sound like her." "Good. She sounds smarter than you." Ray leaned back. "Look, I've known you a long time. You're genuinely excellent at building things. Companies, deals, plans, systems. You are one of the best I have ever seen at that. But you are not—" He paused, choosing the word. "You are not great at the parts that don't have a structure. The parts that are just messy and slow and don't come with a timeline or a metric for success. That's a generous way to put it. I'm being generous because we're friends and I'm on my 2nd cup of coffee. The less generous version is that you spent 4 years married to a woman who needed you to show up for her and you showed up for your job instead. And now you want to show up for a kid who isn't here yet and you're asking me if that's possible." Ray picked up his fork. "I think it is. I genuinely do. But I also think you need to understand that there is a difference between deciding to be a father and actually being one. And Claire has already clocked that difference. She has been clocking it for years. So if you're going in, you need to actually go in, not on your timeline, on the baby's timeline, which means right now, that's her timeline." Damien looked out the diner window at the street. A woman was pushing a stroller against the wind, the baby bundled in something red, the woman's hair blown sideways and her face turned away from the cold. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "No kidding," Ray said. "Nobody does. That's not actually the obstacle. The obstacle is whether you're going to stay in the room when it's hard." Damien didn't answer. Ray picked up the menu to look at dessert. He went back to Aurelius on Friday. Not to see Claire this time, or not only that. He arrived at 6 in the evening during service and asked for a table in her section. The host, Marcus, who was indeed quite large and who looked at Damien with the specific watchfulness of someone who had been briefed, seated him at a table near the wall. Not the center of the room, not near the windows. A quieter spot, which Damien suspected was deliberate. He ordered a glass of water and the pasta. Claire came to his table at 6:12. She stopped when she saw him, and he could see her recalibrate in real time. The specific adjustment of someone who is prepared for something, and had it arrive differently than expected. "You're in my section," she said. "I asked to be." "That's strange." "Probably." He looked at her. "I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to pressure you into anything. I thought if I sat in a room where you were for an hour and didn't try to make it into something, that might be worth more than another conversation." She looked at him with the measuring expression he was getting used to, that careful inventory she was always taking, checking what he said against what she knew of him, looking for the familiar gap between words and intention. "You want water," she said. "I have water." "Do you want anything else?" "The pasta." She wrote it down. She moved to the next table. She came back with his food at 6:31 and set it down without a word, and went back to her other tables. He ate slowly. He watched her work, the practiced economy of it, the way she moved, the way she spoke to tables, the small adjustments she made for different guests. She was good at it, better than the job deserved, in the specific way that people who are competent at everything tend to be too competent for whatever they are currently doing. He thought about the fact that she had a degree in environmental law. He thought about the fact that she had put that degree on hold during their marriage because his work had required them to move twice, and she had never complained about it, not once, and he had told himself that meant it was fine. He stayed for an hour. He tipped 40%. He didn't try to talk to her again on his way out. She watched him leave from across the room. He knew because he felt it, the way you feel something like that. He came back Monday, and Wednesday, and the following Friday. Each time he sat in her section, each time he ordered something, ate it, left a tip that was quietly significant without being performative, and did not try to have a conversation beyond what she offered. On the third visit, she said, without looking up from her notepad, "You're going to have to try something other than the pasta eventually." On the fourth visit, she refilled his water without being asked and let her hand rest on the table for half a second longer than necessary before she moved on. He understood these as what they were. Not forgiveness, not openness, not even warmth, exactly. Just the slow, grudging adjustment of someone recalibrating their expectations against new evidence. Claire had always been empirical that way. She didn't work on declarations. She worked on data. He was providing data. The conversation he had been building toward happened on a Tuesday night in late November, 3 weeks after he first walked back into that restaurant. The dinner service had ended. Most of the staff had gone. Claire came out of the kitchen with her jacket already on and her bag over her shoulder, and she stopped when she saw him sitting at the bar with a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She looked at the coffee. She looked at him. She sat down on the stool 2 seats away and said, "You've been here for 2 hours. The bartender kept me company for most of it." She looked at the bartender, a heavy-set guy named Phil, who had clearly decided that whatever was happening between these two people was not his business. And Phil immediately found something to do at the far end of the bar. Claire pulled her jacket tighter. She was at the stage of pregnancy where the jacket no longer closed all the way in front, and she had stopped trying to make it, which he noticed and did not comment on. "Damien," she said, "what do you want?" "I want to come to the next appointment." He had been planning how to say this for 3 days and had decided that simple was probably better than prepared. "Whichever one is next. I want to be there." She looked at her hands on the bar top. "I had one last week," she said. "Everything is fine. He's—" She stopped. "Everything is fine." He. The word landed quietly between them, and Damien sat very still with it for a moment, feeling it settle into some previously empty space in his chest. "A boy," he said. She looked up. Something moved across her face. Not quite regret for letting it slip, not quite relief. Something in between. "Yes," she said. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked down at his cold coffee and thought about being 7 years old and watching his own father pack a single duffel bag on a Saturday morning while his mother sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. He thought about how long he had carried that specific picture around. Not consciously, not in a way he talked about, just as a kind of weather that moved through him at odd intervals. "I have a good OB," Claire said after a moment. "She's thorough. She doesn't like it when people ask questions that she thinks are really just about control, so—" A small, involuntary, almost smile that she pulled back quickly. "Just a warning." "Noted. And it's a long appointment. Lots of waiting." "I can wait." She looked at him. The almost smile was gone, and she was back to the inventory, the careful measurement, the checking of claims against the record. But something in the quality of the look had changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that meant things were different now, just slightly. The way light changes in a room when someone cracks a window. You wouldn't call it warm, but you'd notice it. "Thursday at 2, she said. "Women's Health Associates on 5th. Don't be late, And don't bring coffee because the waiting room is small and the smell makes me nauseous. She got up from the stool and picked up her bag. Claire, he said. She paused but didn't turn around. I'm sorry. He said it plainly, without embellishment, because anything more constructed than that would sound like he was trying to land it correctly rather than meaning it. For a lot of it, I know that's not a sentence that fixes anything, but I wanted to say it. She was quiet for a beat. It's a start, she said, and then she walked out. He was at Women's Health Associates at 1:50 on Thursday. He found a parking spot 4 blocks away and walked, because the alternative was circling the block and being late. He stood outside the building for 2 minutes because going in early felt presumptuous, and he wasn't sure of the protocol for any of this. Claire arrived at 1:58. She saw him standing outside and stopped for half a second, and he could see that she had half expected him not to come, or to come with caveats, or to call and reschedule for a reason that sounded reasonable and was actually just the familiar machinery of his old pattern. He was just standing there, in the cold, on time. She walked past him toward the door and said, "You'll need to sign in as a guest." He followed her in. The waiting room was, as advertised, small. A row of chairs along the wall, a low table with magazines no one had touched recently, a television in the corner playing something with the sound off. 3 other women waiting, none of them paying attention to him. He signed in at the desk. He sat down in the chair next to Claire, leaving 1 seat of distance because that felt right. She pulled out her phone. He looked at the silent television. "His name," he said. "Have you—" "I haven't decided," she said, not looking up from her phone. "I have 3 options. None of them are family names from your side, so don't." "I wasn't going to." "You were absolutely about to suggest your grandfather's name." He had been. His grandfather's name was Harold, which was not a name for a child born in the present decade, and he had been approximately 3 seconds from suggesting it anyway. He closed his mouth. Something happened in the room that wasn't quite comfort, and wasn't quite ease, but was adjacent to both. The specific quality of 2 people who know each other well enough to be ridiculous together without it. Meaning everything is fine. They had always had that. Even at the worst of it, they had occasionally had that. "Edgar," she said suddenly. "No." "I know. I just wanted to say it out loud and hear someone react." She finally put her phone down. "It's between James and Noah. James is good." "I know James is good. That's why it's on the list." She paused. "He kicks a lot at night. Very opinionated for someone without a name." Damien looked at her profile, the tiredness, the set of her jaw, the hand that rested on the side of her stomach with the unconscious proprietary tenderness of someone who had been doing this alone for months and had adapted to the weight of it. He had missed all of this. Every appointment before this one, every kick at midnight, every morning of it, all of it had happened without him, in the space his absence had made room for. The waiting room called her name. She stood up and looked at him. He stood up too, and she didn't tell him to sit back down. They went in together. He drove her home after. She didn't ask him to, but her car was in the shop, something she mentioned in the waiting room when the doctor asked if she had been managing her stress levels, and she had laughed a specific kind of laugh that meant something had gone sideways recently. And when they came out of the building, he simply said, "I'll take you." And she looked at him for a moment and then said, "Okay." The drive was mostly quiet. She directed him with brief instructions, and he followed them without trying to fill the silence with conversation. The city moved outside the windows. The usual cold November afternoon of it, people moving fast with their shoulders up against the wind. She lived in an apartment building in a neighborhood that was decent, but not what she deserved, and he recognized the neighborhood and felt the familiar flicker of guilt that he was beginning to understand was appropriate and not something to be managed away. He pulled up in front of the building and put the car in park. "Thank you," she said, straightforward, no additional weight on it. "Can I ask something?" She had one hand on the door. She waited. Is that where you want to be? Or is it pays the bills," she said. Not defensively, just factually. "I have savings, I have a plan, it's not forever." A beat. "You're not allowed to fix this, Damien. That's not what being here means." He nodded. She got out of the car. At the door to the building, she turned around, and he was still parked there because he had not yet moved, and she looked at him through the windshield with an expression he couldn't fully read in the distance and the cold. She went inside. He sat in the car. He thought about what Ray had said, about the difference between deciding to be a father and actually being one, about staying in the room when it was hard. He thought about the small ultrasound picture the doctor had printed and handed to Claire, and that Claire had looked at for a long moment before handing him a copy without comment, as if the gesture cost her something and she had decided to spend it anyway. It was in his jacket pocket right now. He could feel the edge of it against his ribs. He drove home. He made dinner for the first time in what felt like months. Not something ordered or catered or eaten in a restaurant to maintain appearances. Just pasta from his own kitchen, badly seasoned, eaten standing at the counter because he hadn't set the table. He stood there and ate his mediocre pasta and looked at the ultrasound picture he had propped against the salt shaker and tried to understand the specific feeling moving through him, which was not happiness exactly, not relief, not readiness. It was closer to the way a person feels when they have been standing in a dark room for a long time and someone has opened a door. Not light yet, just the awareness that light exists somewhere and that the door is open and that moving toward it is the only honest option remaining. He had burned a lot of things down in his life. Some of them deserved it, some of them didn't. He was 39 years old, standing in his own kitchen with a blurry photograph of a child he hadn't known about until 3 weeks ago. And for the first time in longer than he could account for, the future didn't look like a project to be managed. It looked like something that required him to actually be present in it. He wasn't sure yet if he knew how to do that, but he was beginning to understand with a clarity that the careful architecture of his previous life had never quite provided, that not knowing how was not the same as not being willing to learn. And for right now, in this kitchen, with this picture, that was the only place left to start. The conversation with Vanessa happened on a Saturday morning, which was the wrong time for it and also the only time that was left. Damien had been putting it off for 3 weeks, not consciously, or not entirely consciously. He had told himself he was waiting for the right moment, for the right framing, for some configuration of circumstances that would make the conversation less of what it clearly was going to be. But the right moment had not materialized, and Vanessa was not a woman who missed things. And by the time Saturday arrived, she had already been watching him with that recalibrated expression for long enough that the conversation had essentially started without him. She was in his kitchen when he came downstairs. She had her own key, something they had exchanged 3 months ago with the kind of casual significance that felt romantic at the time and felt now like an unfinished sentence. She had made coffee and was standing at the kitchen counter reading something on her phone, and she looked up when he came in and said, "Good morning," and the quality of the silence that followed was specific enough to confirm that they were already in it. "Good morning," he said. She set her phone down. "Sit down, Damien." He sat. She poured him coffee without asking and set it in front of him and remained standing on the other side of the counter, which was either instinct or strategy, and with Vanessa, he could never be entirely sure which. "Tell me what's been happening," she said. He had rehearsed versions of this. He had built and dismantled several different approaches during a run 3 days ago, while the cold air burned in his lungs and the city moved around him, and he tried to find some arrangement of words that was honest without being brutal. Nothing he had rehearsed came back to him now. "I've been seeing Claire," he said. Vanessa's expression didn't change. That was the thing about her. She had remarkable facial control, a professional asset, and a personal defense, and she deployed it the same way in both contexts. "Seeing her," she repeated. That's not what I mean. She's pregnant, Vanessa. The baby is mine." The silence this time was different. Something moved behind her eyes. A rapid internal processing that she kept off her face but couldn't keep entirely out of her stillness. The specific stillness of someone absorbing impact. "You know this," she said. "She told you." "Yes." "How long have you known?" 3 weeks. The number landed between them. He watched her do the arithmetic. 3 weeks of dinners and conversations and the particular quality of his distraction that she had clearly been cataloging and had attributed, until this moment, to work stress or the deal in Denver that had been dragging out or some other thing she had filed in the category of Damien's occasional retreats into himself. 3 weeks of knowing something this large and not telling her. "I see," she said. "Vanessa, how far along is she?" 7 months. She picked up her coffee mug and held it the way Ray had held his at the diner, both hands, not drinking, just holding. It was, Damien thought, the universal gesture of people trying to keep their hands occupied while their minds were doing something difficult. So you have been, visiting her? At the restaurant? At the restaurant and at a doctor's appointment. She put the mug down carefully. Too carefully. The deliberateness of someone managing an impulse. You've been going to appointments with her, Vanessa said, for 3 weeks, while continuing to see me, and you didn't say anything. I know. That's not, Damien, that is not a small thing to omit. I know that too. She turned away from him and looked out the kitchen window at the narrow view of the street below. A parking lot, a patch of November sky. Nothing interesting. She stood there for a moment with her back to him, and he could see the deliberate quality of her composure holding, the specific effort it took. What do you want? She asked. Her voice was even, too even. From this, from any of this, what are you actually asking for? This was the question people kept asking him, and he still did not have a clean answer. I want to be present for my son, he said. Whatever that looks like. I want to show up for this. He paused. I don't think I know what that means for us yet. For you and me. I wanted to be honest with you before I tried to figure that out. She turned back around. She looked at him for a long time, and this time she let him see it, whatever was happening behind her eyes. The anger that she had been keeping off her face, the hurt that she would not, he suspected, be particularly interested in admitting to, the specific calculating clarity of a woman who had built her entire life on knowing which rooms to walk into and which ones to walk out of. There is no figuring out what this means for us, she said. That's what you're not saying, but mean. You've already decided. You decided 3 weeks ago when you went back to that restaurant and didn't tell me. He didn't argue with that. She nodded once, a small, final nod, the kind that closes something. I'm going to need my key back, she said. Vanessa, I'm not doing this with tears and shouting, Damien. That's not who I am. I would just like my key, please. He got up and got the key from the hook by the door and brought it back to her and set it on the counter between them. She picked it up and put it in her jacket pocket and picked up her phone. For what it's worth, she said, moving toward the hallway, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you are a person who didn't know what he wanted until something forced him to figure it out. She paused at the kitchen door. I just wish it hadn't been my time that got spent on the figuring. She left without a scene, without a slammed door, without any of the theatrics that would have, in a different way, been easier to absorb. He stood in his kitchen and heard the front door close with a quiet, deliberate click, and the silence that followed was the specific silence of a space that has been vacated in a way that feels permanent. He drank his coffee alone. He thought about what she had said, about time, about his time and hers, and the difference between a person who knows what they want and a person who finds out by process of elimination. He thought she was probably right. He thought she had been a good partner in the ways that things look good from the outside, and he thought they had probably both known for longer than either of them acknowledged that the good from the outside was the majority of what they had. It still hurt. He wanted to be honest about that, at least inside his own head, in the privacy of his kitchen on a Saturday morning. He had cared about Vanessa. He had enjoyed who he was when things between them were uncomplicated, in the early months when they were just two functional people having a good time in a city full of bad times. Whatever they had been, it wasn't nothing. But he sat with the hurt for a while and then he let it settle, the way you let sediment settle in water until the thing underneath it was clear. He was going to be a father. In approximately 8 weeks, a child with no say in any of this was going to arrive in the world and require someone to show up consistently and without conditions, and that someone needed to be him. Everything else was secondary to that. He was starting to understand that with the specific bone-deep certainty of someone who has been circling a truth for a long time and has finally stopped circling. He rinsed his coffee mug. He got in the car and drove to the hardware store and spent 45 minutes looking at cribs, which he had absolutely no context for evaluating, and came home with a book about infant sleep schedules and a white noise machine still in the box, because those were the two things the hardware store employee, a grandmother named Pat, who clearly enjoyed having opinions, had told him were non-negotiable. It was, all things considered, not the worst Saturday he'd ever had. December arrived with the particular aggression of a city winter. Cold that had intent behind it. Wind that came around corners like it was looking for someone. Damien restructured his schedule for the first time in his career to accommodate things that were not billable hours. Thursday afternoons became non-negotiable. He moved the Denver call to Mondays. He delegated 3 site visits to his junior partners, which required a conversation with Ray that lasted 20 minutes and ended with Ray saying, "Good. I was going to take those visits anyway," in a tone that suggested he had been waiting for this development. He and Claire settled into something that was not a routine, exactly, because Claire resisted anything that looked like a pattern he was imposing. It was more like a series of individual choices made one at a time that happened to accumulate. He drove her to appointments. He texted before coming by, always, and waited for confirmation. He did not offer money, and he did not make suggestions about her living situation, and he did not try to fix any of the things she had told him he was not allowed to fix. It was harder than any deal he had ever closed, not because she was difficult. She wasn't, particularly. She was direct, and she was honest, and she was consistent in the things she asked of him, which were not complicated. Be present. Be on time. Don't make it about you. It was hard because all of his instincts ran in the other direction. Every room he walked into, his default was to assess and improve and optimize and control. He had built a successful business on those instincts. They were good instincts for business. They were not the right instincts for this. The first time he understood that viscerally was a Wednesday evening in the second week of December. Claire had called him, which was still unusual enough that he answered on the first ring. Her voice on the phone had a quality he recognized, that particular flatness of someone who was holding together and didn't want to discuss how much it was costing them. "My car is not fixed," she said. "The part they ordered is delayed. I have a shift tonight and I just need a ride. I'll be there in 20 minutes. You don't need to come up, just 20 minutes. He was already looking for his keys. He picked her up and drove her to the restaurant and said he would come back at close. And she started to say he didn't have to, and he said, "I know." And she stopped. He went and had dinner somewhere else, a Vietnamese place 2 blocks away that he had never tried, and that turned out to be excellent. And he sat at a corner table and checked his emails and thought about the 8 things on his to-do list that were not getting done tonight. He went back at 10:30. She came out the side door and got in the car without comment, and he drove. They were halfway back to her apartment when she said quietly, "It's not always going to be like this." "Like what?" "Like I'm someone you're managing, like a problem to be solved." She was looking out the passenger window at the city moving by. "I know how you work. I was married to you for 10 years. I know how your brain categorizes things, and I am not—" She stopped. "I am not a logistics problem." He felt the correction and sat with it for a moment before answering. "I know that," he said. "I don't think you do yet. I think you're trying, and I can see that you're trying, and I am. I appreciate it. I do. But there's a difference between being present and being efficient." She shifted in the seat, the specific discomfort of late pregnancy in a car seat, the adjustment she made now without thinking about it. "Sometimes I just need you to sit there and not fix anything." "I don't know how to sit there and not fix anything." "I know, that's what I'm telling you." She turned and looked at him. "You should learn." He drove the rest of the way in silence. When he pulled up to her building, she moved to get out and then stopped and turned back and said, "The car part is supposed to arrive Thursday. The mechanic called this afternoon." "Okay. So you probably won't need to do this again." "Okay." She looked at him. The streetlight from outside put half her face in shadow and left the other half in that amber city glow, and she looked tired and very human and entirely unlike the version of her he had kept in his head for the 8 months of their divorce. The convenient version, the resolved version, the version that had moved on cleanly so that he could move on cleanly too. "You're doing better," she said, not as a compliment, as a data point. "I want you to know I see that." She got out of the car. He waited until she was through the door of the building before he drove away. He had started doing that, waiting until she was safely inside, not because she needed him to and not because he announced it, just because it seemed like the right thing, and he had, slowly, started doing things because they were right rather than because they served a larger strategic purpose. He went home and made the bad pasta again and ate it standing up and thought about what she had said, about the difference between being present and being efficient, about sitting in a room without fixing anything. He thought it might be the most useful thing anyone had said to him in years. The thing he had not anticipated was how much of this would be invisible. There were no metrics for showing up consistently. No quarterly reports on the progress of learning to be a different kind of person. Nobody was tracking the number of times he drove to her apartment in the cold, or the Thursday afternoons he kept clear, or the fact that he had read approximately 1,200 pages of material on infant development and child psychology in 6 weeks. Not because anyone asked him to, but because he needed to feel like he was building something he understood, and research was the only tool he had that reliably did that for him. Ray noticed. "You look different," Ray said, at their Thursday lunch in early January. They had made the diner a standing thing by now, more or less. "Tired. But different tired, not the regular tired." "What's the difference?" "Regular tired is when you're overextended and running on coffee and you need a week off. This is..." Ray considered it. "This is the tired of someone who's been paying attention to something other than himself. It's new on you." Damien said nothing. "How's Claire?" Ray asked. "She had swollen ankles all week. The doctor says it's normal, but she hates it." Ray looked at him for a second. "You know about her ankles," he said. "She mentioned it." "She's talking to you. Sometimes, when she wants to." Damien picked up his coffee. "She still doesn't trust me. I don't mean that as a complaint. I just mean it's accurate. She's watching, keeping score." "Can you blame her?" "No." Ray nodded. He broke a piece of toast in half and looked at it and said, "You're building credit." "What?" "Credit. You spent 10 years in that marriage drawing down an account, and you didn't notice the balance dropping because you were making money fast enough that it didn't feel like it mattered. Now you're putting back in. Slowly. It doesn't show up fast. Credit never does." He put the toast down. "The question is whether you keep depositing even when you don't see the balance change." Damien thought about the drive to the restaurant, about the pasta, about the Thursday afternoons, about waiting in waiting rooms without asking questions the doctor thought were really about control. "I think I can," he said. "Then stop thinking about it," Ray said, "and just keep doing it." So, the nursery happened because of a Tuesday night conversation that he had not planned for and that Claire had clearly not planned to allow. He had driven her to what was supposed to be a quick errand, a baby supply store on the east side, the kind of overwhelming retail experience that seemed designed to make new parents feel simultaneously underprepared and over-targeted. Claire had a list on her phone. He followed her through the aisles with the vague usefulness of someone who was present but had no operational authority. She stopped in front of a display of cribs and looked at it with the expression of someone doing math in their head. Not store math, real math, the kind that factors in things that aren't on price tags. "The one on the left," he said. She looked at him. "Why?" "The hardware is recessed, easier to assemble without tools catching fabric, and the slat spacing is better." He had spent more time on crib research than he would admit to anyone. "The one on the right is more expensive, but the reviews are inconsistent." She looked back at the cribs. "I have the white noise machine," he said, "at my apartment, still in the box. I bought it 2 months ago." A pause. "I didn't know what else to do with it." Something happened on her face. Not a smile, just a small, involuntary relaxation of the carefully maintained neutral, like a muscle unclenching. "You bought a white noise machine 2 months ago," she said, "and a book about sleep schedules. I've read it twice. It has some genuinely alarming charts." She looked at him for a moment, then she looked back at the crib. Then she said slowly, as if she was weighing whether to say it, "My apartment doesn't have a separate room. It's a 1-bedroom. The crib is going to be very close to my bed." "I know." "You've never been to my apartment." "I've dropped you off 43 times. I can see the layout from the lobby." She was quiet. "I'm not suggesting anything," he said. "I'm not trying to manage this. I looked at the building because I couldn't stop myself, and I know it's a 1-bedroom, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't notice that, that's all." She looked at the crib on the left for a long time. "I'll get the left one," she said. He nodded. They went to the checkout. He did not offer to pay. She did not ask him to. But when they were loading the boxed crib into the back of his car, she said, without looking at him, The white noise machine would probably be useful. And then she went around to the passenger side and got in and adjusted the seat and did not say anything else about it. He understood this as the thing it was, a small deliberate opening, the size of a window latch, held just far enough to let in air without making promises about what came next. He drove carefully. But January gave way to February, and the accumulation of small things continued in the patient, unglamorous way that actual change works, which looks nothing like it does in the imagined version. He learned the name of her doctor. He learned that she was allergic to the brand of prenatal vitamins her pharmacy defaulted to, and that the substitute was harder to find, and that she had been managing this logistical annoyance for 3 months before mentioning it in passing, at which point he located a supplier and arranged a standing delivery without telling her until it showed up. She called him about the delivery. "You can't just do that," she said. "You were running out of options. You can't just fix things without asking." "I know. I'm sorry." He meant it. "I should have asked. You want me to cancel it?" A pause. "No," she said, "but ask next time." "I will." She hung up. He had not entirely broken the pattern, and he had not pretended to. He was still, in his bones, a person who solved problems when he identified them. The work was in the pausing, the space between seeing a problem and moving on it, the space where he was supposed to check whether fixing was what was actually needed, or whether it was just what he was comfortable doing. He was getting marginally better at the pause. The bitterness between them had shifted in texture without disappearing. It was less like a wall now and more like weather. Present. Something to account for. Something that changed conditions without making movement impossible. She was not warm with him. She was not unguarded. But she was honest, consistently and without cruelty. And in her honesty, there was a kind of respect that he found himself valuing more than he had expected to. She told him things sometimes. Small things. A night she couldn't sleep. A coworker at the restaurant who had been needlessly unkind about her pregnancy. A call from her mother in Ohio that had lasted too long and ended badly. She told him the way you tell someone a thing because you need to say it out loud and they are the person who is there, not because you are inviting them in. He understood the distinction and respected it and did not push past it. He told her things too occasionally. A problem at work that was stubborn. A contractor who had been dishonest about a structural issue on a building in the Bronx. Small things, chosen carefully, offered without expectation. It was not friendship. It was not reconciliation. It was not anything with a clean name. It was two people learning, very slowly and with varying degrees of competence, how to build something functional from the wreckage of something that hadn't been. It required them both to hold their history without letting it govern every present moment. And some days that was easier than others, and neither of them pretended otherwise. On a Friday in mid-February, he arrived at her apartment for the first time. She had asked him to come, not dramatically, just a text that said the furniture from the store needed to be moved and the super wasn't available and could he come by. He showed up with tools and with the white noise machine, which he had kept in his car for 3 weeks on the theory that patience was occasionally rewarded. The apartment was small and extremely orderly. Every available surface used with the precision of someone who had learned to live deliberately in a limited space. Books stacked with care. A plant on the windowsill that was genuinely thriving, which he found, for reasons he couldn't articulate, unexpectedly moving. Photographs on the wall of people he recognized, her sister's family, her college roommate, a hike somewhere with a view that looked like Wyoming. No photographs of their marriage. Of course not. He moved the dresser without complaining about the angle of the door frame. He assembled the crib in 40 minutes with the slightly aggressive focus of someone who had been reading about crib assembly for weeks and was prepared to apply that knowledge whether or not the moment called for that level of intensity. Claire sat on the bed and watched him, occasionally eating crackers from a sleeve she had open on the nightstand. "The instruction manual is wrong about step 7, he said. "I know. I read it last night. I was going to figure it out. But the left bracket goes on first, then the cross support. If you do it the other way, it won't align." "I know, Damien. I know." She ate a cracker. "Keep going." He kept going. When the crib was assembled, she came and looked at it, standing beside him in the small space between the bed and the wall, and they both looked at the thing. The actual, physical object, white painted wood with recessed hardware and correct slat spacing, sitting in the corner of her one-bedroom apartment where their son was going to sleep. It was the most real the whole situation had ever felt. He was aware of her beside him. Not in any complicated way, just the awareness of proximity, the specific weight of standing next to someone who had once been the person you came home to, in a room that was full of the evidence of a life she had built entirely without him. "It looks good," she said. "Yeah. Thank you." She said it simply, without the careful framing she usually applied to things that were going to cost her something. Just thank you. "Do you want me to set up the white noise machine?" She looked at it, still in the box, sitting on the floor by the door where he had set it when he came in. "Where does it go?" "On the dresser, facing the crib. Relatively close, but not, the manual says not less than 7 feet. Of course you read the manual. It's a very thorough manual." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." He set it up. She watched. When it was done, she turned it on. The soft, even static of it filling the small room, the kind of sound that immediately made everything slightly slower and quieter. They stood in the room with the white noise running and the crib assembled in the corner and the plant on the windowsill and the photographs on the wall. And outside the window, the February city carried on with its business, indifferent. And inside this apartment, something had shifted by a degree that was hard to measure, but impossible to miss. She sat down on the bed again. She looked tired. The particular bone-deep tired of 8 months along, of working on her feet, of carrying everything she had been carrying alone since before he had known about any of it. 3 weeks, she said. Give or take. I'm not ready. He looked at her. The admission cost her something. He could see it. I don't think readiness is really available for this, he said. I think you just get there and figure it out. That is profoundly unhelpful. I know. I'm sorry. I read 11 books and I still don't have anything better than that. She laughed. It came out before she could stop it. A short, genuine, involuntary laugh. The kind that surprised both of them. She covered it with her hand and looked away. He did not comment on the laugh. He understood that commenting on the laugh would be the wrong move. He picked up the instruction manual from the floor and the packaging from the crib and the plastic wrapping from the white noise machine and put them all in the garbage bag he had brought because he had known there would be garbage. He washed his hands at her kitchen sink. He got his coat from the hook by the door. Good night, Claire, he said. She was still sitting on the bed, the white noise running, her hand resting on her stomach in that way she had. Good night, she said. He let himself out and went down the stairs and walked to his car in the cold and sat there for a moment before starting it. He was not the same person who had sat in a different car outside Aurelius 3 months ago, watching a kitchen door, trying to decide whether to do the hard thing. He wasn't a changed man. He didn't believe in that framing, thought it was the kind of story people told to avoid acknowledging how much of change was just grinding, repetitive, unglamorous choice made over and over again without applause. But he was a different kind of tired than he had been 3 months ago. The tired that Ray had identified at the diner. The tired of paying attention to something other than himself. He started the car. 3 weeks, she had said. He drove home through the city and did not stop thinking about the crib in the corner and the white noise machine on the dresser and the way she had laughed, just for a second before catching herself. He had put together a crib in a one-bedroom apartment on a Friday night in February, and it was the most useful he had felt in years. The call came at 2:17 in the morning on a Tuesday in the last week of February. Damien was not asleep. He had been in bed for 2 hours, but sleep had not arrived, the way it sometimes didn't anymore. Not from stress exactly, not from the particular wired brain exhaustion of overwork that he knew well, but from something closer to vigilance. A low-level alertness that he had started carrying since the nursery visit, since the assembled crib and the white noise machine and the 3 weeks she had said, give or take, in a tone that made give or take sound like it might be sooner than later. His phone lit up on the nightstand. Claire. He answered before the second ring. Hey. Her voice was different, controlled in a way that meant she was working at it. I think it's time. He was already sitting up. How far apart? About 7 minutes, but they started strong. The doctor said when it's not your first, it can go faster, except it is my first. So I don't know why she told me that. I think she was trying to be reassuring. Are you alone? My neighbor is here. Mrs. Okafor, not your Ray, different Okafor. She came down when I knocked. She's sitting in the kitchen. I'm leaving now. Don't. He stopped himself from saying, "Don't go without me," which was a sentence with too much in it for 2:17 in the morning. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Keep the door unlocked. Damien. Yeah. A pause. The kind of pause that contains more than the words around it. Drive carefully, she said. I'm not going anywhere fast. He was in his car in 4 minutes. He drove through the city, empty at this hour in the specific way of a city that never fully sleeps but does occasionally quiet down. The traffic lights cycling through their patterns for streets that held almost no one. The occasional cab. The delivery trucks that owned the early morning hours. He drove carefully because she had said to, and because arriving in one piece was the only useful thing he could contribute in the next 20 minutes. He thought about the books. All 12 of them. The alarming charts and the reassuring paragraphs and the sections on labor and support and what a partner is supposed to do, which came down, in most of them, to some variation of be there and don't make it about you. He had highlighted that line in 3 separate books without realizing he was doing it until he found himself reading the same sentence for the 3rd time with a yellow marker in his hand. He found parking on her block at 2:36. He took the stairs. Mrs. Okafor was a small woman in her 70s with silver-streaked hair and the particular competent calm of someone who had seen most of what life produces and was not easily rattled. She let him in and looked him up and down with the assessing expression of a woman who has been keeping an eye on a situation and has decided for now to extend provisional approval. She's in the bedroom, Mrs. Okafor said. Bags by the door. She packed it 2 weeks ago. She picked up her cardigan from the kitchen chair. You good? Yeah. You sure? Because you look like a man who is not sure. I'm sure, he said, and then because honesty seemed called for at 2:36 in the morning, I'm terrified, but I'm sure. Mrs. Okafor nodded, as if this was the correct answer. Good, she said. Terrified is honest. It's the ones who aren't terrified you have to worry about. She patted his arm once, brisk, not unkind, and let herself out. Claire was sitting on the edge of the bed in a sweatshirt and loose pants, her hospital bag visible just inside the closet door, her phone in her hand and her other hand pressed to the side of her stomach. She looked up when he came in. She looked scared. Not the controlled, composed version she showed the world, not the guarded version she had been showing him for the past 3 months. Just scared and tired and very human in a way that made his chest tighten in a different way than usual. Hey, he said. Hey. She exhaled. Okay, I need you to... Can you just... She stopped, reformulating. Don't be efficient right now, okay? Just... I know. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. Not too close, not at a useful distance. Just there. I know. She breathed through the next contraction without speaking. He watched her do it. The particular focused inwardness of it. The way she found some internal thing to hold on to and held it until the wave passed. When it did, she let out a slow breath and her shoulders dropped by 1/2 inch. Okay, she said. Let's go. He picked up the bag. He offered his other hand. She looked at it for 1/2 second. That inventory again, that quick check. And then she took it. St. Elias Medical Center at 3 in the morning had the specific quality of a place that exists in a different dimension from the rest of the city, bright where everything else was dark, busy where everything else was quiet, full of purposeful motion and the particular urgency of a building where things are always beginning and ending simultaneously. The maternity ward was on the 5th floor. The nurse at the desk was brisk and efficient and looked at Damien with the neutral assessment of someone who had seen every configuration of people walk through these doors and was not here to have opinions about any of them. Partner? She asked. He looked at Claire. Claire looked at the desk. Yes, she said. He signed the form she indicated. He did not examine the word too closely. They put Claire in a room at the end of the hall. It was not a large room. There was a bed and a monitor and a chair that had clearly been chosen by someone who had never tried to sit in it for more than 20 minutes. and a window that showed the parking structure, and beyond it, the dark city and the particular purple-gray of a sky that was not quite night anymore but hadn't committed to morning. The labor was not fast, and it was not easy. The books had been accurate about this, at least the ones that were honest rather than reassuring, in describing early labor as a sustained, exhausting negotiation between a body doing something enormous and a mind that understood logically what was happening but had no template for the scale of it. Claire's doctor arrived at 4:15, the thorough OB Damien had been warned about, a compact woman in her 50s named Dr. Patricia Vance, who looked at Damien in a way that conveyed she had been briefed on the situation and had reserved judgment. "How are we doing?" she asked Claire. "Fine," Claire said in the specific tone of a woman who found the word fine useful for its ambiguity. "Good." Dr. Vance checked the monitor, asked several questions, and at one point looked at Damien and said, "Don't ask me anything that is actually about wanting to understand the timeline. I'll tell you what you need to know when you need to know it." He nodded. She seemed satisfied. The hours that followed were the kind of hours that exist in a category outside regular time. Not long exactly, not short exactly, just dense. Damien sat in the unreasonable chair and stood when that was better, and moved to the side of the bed when Claire wanted him there, and stepped back when she didn't, and kept his mouth mostly closed and his attention entirely present. There were moments. At one point, around 5 in the morning, Claire looked at the ceiling and said, with the exhausted candor of someone who had temporarily run out of resources for maintaining usual restraint, "I am so angry at you." He didn't say anything. "Not right now, like, in general. I'm still so angry." She turned her head to look at him. "I need you to know that." "I know it." "Okay." She looked back at the ceiling. "I just needed to say it." "I know, you can say it." "I know I can." A pause. "The crib looks good, though." "Thank you." "I didn't say it to make you feel better." "I know that, too." She breathed through a contraction, and he watched her and did not do anything except be in the room, which was the hardest thing he had done in a long time, and also he was beginning to understand the only thing that was actually required of him right now. Later, it might have been 6, might have been closer to 7. Time had become a different kind of thing entirely. She grabbed his wrist, not his hand. His wrist, the way you grab something structural when you need to hold on. He covered her hand with his other hand and stayed where he was. She didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, and outside the window, the sky had started doing what February skies eventually do, which is trade the purple-gray for a pale, non-committal light that is technically morning, whether anyone is ready for it or not. James Cross arrived at 7:48 in the morning. They had settled on James somewhere in the middle of the previous night, during a quiet stretch between contractions when Claire had said it out loud again. Just James, and he had said it sounded right, and she had said, "I know it sounds right, that's what I said." And they had not discussed it further because the name was decided. He was 6 pounds 11 ounces. He had a lot of dark hair. Witch doctor. Vance mentioned was not always permanent, and a face that was doing its best given the circumstances of arrival, and he cried with a confidence that suggested he had opinions about the whole situation and intended to express them. Damien was standing at the side of the room when it happened. He had been asked to move there for the final portion of things, and he had moved without discussion, and he watched from there, feeling, in his body, the specific sensation of a man who has crossed from one version of his life into another, and knows it, but can't yet find the shape of the new one. Dr. Vance said something to the nurse. The nurse did several things with practiced speed. There was a sound, the first sound, and then there was a baby wrapped in a white blanket, and Claire was holding him against her chest and looking down at him with an expression Damien had never seen on her face before, which made sense because no experience in their 10 years together had required it. She looked shattered and whole at the same time, wrecked and completely certain, the most tired he had ever seen another human being look, and also somehow the most present. The nurse turned to Damien. "Do you want to hold him?" He heard the question from a distance. It arrived in his ears and traveled to whatever part of the brain processes language, and then just sat there for a moment while the rest of him caught up. "Yes," he said. He was aware distantly that his voice had done something it didn't usually do. He was aware that his hands were not entirely steady when the nurse guided him through the hold. The proper position, the support for the head, the specific geometry of holding a human being who weighs 6 pounds 11 ounces and has no awareness of being held, just the awareness of warmth and closeness, and whether those things are present or absent. He looked down at James. He had read about this. He had read about it in multiple books, had even read personal accounts of it, first-person descriptions of men who said that something had changed in them permanently at this moment, and he had read those accounts with the skepticism of a person who has not experienced the thing being described and therefore categorizes it as sentiment. The soft, imprecise language people use for experiences they can't explain. He understood now why the language was imprecise. Because the thing that happened when he looked at James, at his son, at this 6 pound 11 ounce specific person with dark hair, and a face that was still finding its arrangement, was not a feeling he had words for. Not in the sense of lacking vocabulary. In the sense that the vocabulary existed, but the words were insufficient, the way a map is insufficient for the actual terrain. He thought, involuntarily, and with a clarity that bypassed his usually reliable filtering system, of his father packing the duffel bag on a Saturday morning, the kitchen table, his mother at the wall. He thought of every version of that morning that he had carried forward into his adult life and built carefully around, the decisions that were about not wanting to need anyone, the decisions that were about keeping moving so that nothing could catch up. He thought about 8 months of a divorce, during which he had told himself everything was resolved. He thought about Claire at a counter in her bathroom, holding a positive test, alone. He thought about 43 drives back to her apartment building, the light in her window, the door that closed before he drove away. He looked at James and understood, without any useful separation between the knowing and the feeling, that he had been a person who left. He had left in every way a person can leave, physically, emotionally, by degree, by omission, by the sustained choice of other priorities. He had left his marriage the way you leave a building slowly, room by room, and told himself it wasn't leaving because he still had a key. He was not going to leave this. He didn't say it out loud. He wasn't performing anything for anyone. It was not a declaration. It was more like something settling into a load-bearing position, quiet, structural, the kind of thing that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. He became aware that his eyes were wet. He didn't try to address this. Across the room, from the bed, Claire was watching him. She had the particular stillness of someone who is allowing themselves to observe something without deciding yet what it means. Her hair was damp against the pillow. She looked entirely depleted and entirely awake at the same time, which seemed physically contradictory but was completely accurate. He looked up and met her eyes. She didn't say anything, neither did he, but something passed between them in the silence of that room, between the monitoring equipment and the morning light coming through the window and the small sounds of a 7-minute-old person figuring out the basics of existence. Something that was not forgiveness, not yet, and not love. Not in the old sense, but was something prior to both of those things. Something that had to exist before either of them was possible. Recognition, maybe. Honesty. Two people seeing each other without the usual protective equipment. He looked back down at James. "Hey," he said quietly. Not performing it, just saying it. James did not respond, being 7 minutes old and occupied with more fundamental concerns, but his face did something that Damien understood intellectually was a reflex and emotionally meant everything, and Damien Cross, who had spent his professional life navigating difficult rooms with his composure fully intact, stood in a hospital room at 7:55 in the morning and let the tears come without trying to stop them or explain them or get them under control. The nurse left quietly. Dr. Vance did something at the monitor and did not look at him. The room was very still. He stayed all day. He had not planned to stay all day. He had not planned anything beyond the arrival. The getting there, the being present, the staying in the room when it was hard, which Ray had identified as the obstacle. But James arrived and the morning became afternoon, and at no point did Damien have any awareness of wanting to be somewhere else. Claire slept in the afternoon, finally and deeply, and in the way that only extreme physical expenditure allows. The sleep of someone whose body has simply overruled every other system and is enforcing recovery. He sat in the unreasonable chair with James in the hospital bassinet beside him and watched them both. the small movements of the baby, the deep stillness of Claire, the afternoon light doing its slow transit across the wall. He thought about the business. He thought about the contractor in the Bronx, the Monday call, the quarterly reports his assistant would be compiling. He thought about these things the way you think about them when they are on a list that exists but is not the list you are currently working from. He thought about his father. He thought, I'm not going to be that. Not as a vow, not as something he was making for an audience, just as a fact that he was registering, the way you register a decision after you have already made it and are only now finding the language. Ray came by at 3 o'clock. He had not been called, but he appeared at the door with 2 coffees and the specific expression of a man who has good instincts about when to show up. He looked at Damien. He looked at the bassinet. He looked at Claire sleeping. He handed Damien one of the coffees without speaking. They stood side by side at the window for a few minutes, drinking their coffee, looking at the parking structure and the February city. James, Damien said quietly. Ray nodded. Good name. Claire picked it. Smart woman. Ray looked at the bassinet. He was quiet for a long moment, and Damien had known him long enough to know this was the quiet of someone feeling something and not immediately trying to convert it into words. You doing okay? Damien looked at his son. No, he said. Yes. He stopped, took a breath. I don't have a word for what I am right now. Yeah, Ray said. That's about right. They stood at the window until Claire stirred, and then Ray set his empty cup on the windowsill, put his hand briefly on Damien's shoulder, once without comment, and left. Evening came. The shift changed. New nurses. The particular institutional quiet of a hospital at 6 p.m., dinner trays in the hallway, the monitoring equipment cycling through its steady sounds. Claire was awake. She had eaten something, hospital soup, which she described as having been made by someone who had heard soup described but had never encountered it personally, and she was holding James against her shoulder with the careful, slightly stunned tenderness of someone learning an entirely new physical language. Damien was in the chair. He had been in the chair for most of the day, and he had lost feeling in his left leg twice, and he had absolutely no intention of leaving. You've been here all day, Claire said. Yes. She looked at him. He looked back. The room was quiet. Are you going to keep doing that? She asked. Showing up? Yes. Every time? Yes. She looked at James, the top of his head, the dark hair, the small face against her shoulder. I'm not ready to trust you all the way, she said. Not as an accusation, not with particular emotion around it, just as a fact she was reporting accurately. I want you to know that. I don't want you to think that today means I'm not there yet. I know. I know you know. I just needed to say it out loud. You can always say it out loud. She was quiet. Thank you for staying, she said after a moment. He looked at her. At Claire, who had been his wife for 10 years, and his adversary for the divorce and his complicated project for 3 months, and who had just done the most extraordinary thing he had ever watched a person do, and who was still, despite everything, through all of it, the most honest person he had ever known. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. The inventory, the check, the careful assessment of claim against record. Then she looked back down at James. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. In the specific tone of someone who is not yet all the way there, but has decided, provisionally, on the basis of available evidence, to keep the door open. He left at 9. She had told him to go home, that she would be fine, that Mrs. Okafor would come in the morning. She said it plainly, without making it a rejection, just the logistics of a woman who was exhausted and needed her sleep and didn't need watching over. He understood the difference. He rode the elevator down with a young couple going home. New parents, he could tell, by the dazed quality of their joy and the slightly too careful way they were carrying the car seat, as if the weight of it still surprised them. They were talking in low voices about something. The woman's head tilted toward the man, and they did not look up when the elevator opened. He walked to his car. The city was cold and usual around him. He sat in the driver's seat and did not immediately start the engine. James. 6 pounds, 11 ounces, dark hair. A face that was still arriving at its own arrangement. He thought about the books on his nightstand, the 12 of them, with their highlighted passages and their alarming charts and their repeated variations of be there and don't make it about you. He thought about the white noise machine on the dresser in the one-bedroom apartment on the east side. He thought about the crib with the recessed hardware, correctly assembled, waiting. He thought about his father's duffel bag. He thought, not this time. He started the car. The drive home was 20 minutes through streets he had driven 1,000 times. And he noticed things he did not usually notice. A light on in a third-floor window, a couple walking a dog, the specific amber of the city at night, familiar and unremarkable, and for reasons he would have had difficulty explaining before today, remarkably good. He got home. He did not make pasta. He stood at the kitchen counter and ate cereal directly from the box because he was too tired to find a bowl and too wired to sleep, and he looked at nothing in particular and felt the day settling into him. The full, complete weight of it, every hour from 2:17 a.m. to 9 at night, every moment in the unreasonable chair and at the side of the bed and at the window with Ray and all of it. He thought about the moment when he had looked up from James and found Claire watching him. That look. He had not been performing anything in that moment, and she had known it. That was the thing. Claire, who had spent 10 years learning to read the difference between what he showed and what he meant, had been watching him from across that room with James in his arms and the tears doing what they were doing, and she had not looked away. She had not looked away. He stood at his counter in his kitchen at 9:45 at night eating cereal and thought about that, about being seen without the architecture, without the performance of competence and control, and the carefully maintained image of a man who always knew what he was doing. He had been terrified in that hospital room. He had stayed anyway. He thought maybe that was the whole lesson. The one he had been reading about in 12 books and hearing from Ray at the diner and absorbing slowly, imperfectly, from a woman who had stopped waiting for him to figure it out and had simply started recording whether he did. Terrified and present. That was it. That was all of it. He put the cereal box back in the cabinet. He washed his hands. He went to bed and lay there in the dark and thought about James, specifically about the 7-minute-old version of him who had no awareness of any of this, who only knew warmth or cold, presence or absence, and who was going to know, from here forward, which one he had. He was going to know presence. Damien was going to make sure of it, not because it was the right narrative or the redemptive arc or the correct thing to do for the sake of doing correct things, but because he had looked at his son and felt the full, terrible weight of loving someone that much, that fast, that completely, without any of the usual defenses in place. And there was, on the other side of something that large, no version of himself left that was interested in leaving. He closed his eyes. For the first time in months, maybe years, he slept without the vigilance. There was nothing left to brace for. He was already in it. The first 3 weeks after James came home were the kind of weeks that rearrange a person at the cellular level. Damien had read about this too. He had read about sleep deprivation and the adjustment period and the specific disorientation of new parenthood, and he had nodded along with the books in the way you nod along with a weather forecast before you actually stand in the storm. The forecast is accurate. It tells you rain is coming. It does not tell you what it feels like to be soaked through at 3 in the morning, standing in a one-bedroom apartment in February, swaying a 6-week-old back and forth in the dark, because the white noise machine, which he had researched extensively and set up correctly and positioned at the scientifically recommended distance, had stopped being sufficient somewhere around 2 a.m. And James had decided, with the absolute conviction of someone who had never once been wrong about anything, that the only acceptable alternative was motion. Damien swayed. Claire was asleep in the bedroom, or trying to be. She had been awake for the previous feeding and the one before that, and at some point around 1 in the morning, she had come out to the living room where he was sitting with James and said, "Go home, Damien, you don't have to," and he had said, "Sleep." And she had looked at him for one long assessing moment and then gone back to bed without further argument, which told him more about how tired she was than anything else could have. He swayed. James made small sounds that were not quite crying and not quite contentment, the sounds of a person calibrating, figuring out where the edges of the world were. "I know," Damien said quietly to his son. "I don't know what I'm doing either. We're both new at this." James looked at the middle distance with the unfocused intensity of someone who could not yet process what he was seeing but was committed to looking anyway. Here's what I can tell you, Damien said. He kept his voice low, just sound and rhythm, the way the book said mattered more than content at this stage. I'm going to be here. I know you don't know what that means yet. I know it's just warm or not warm, sound or quiet. That's fine. That's all you need to know right now. He adjusted his hold the way he had learned, the support at the neck, and the specific angle. I've got you. James made a sound. Damien kept swaying. The city was quiet outside the window. The apartment was small and slightly too warm in the way of old buildings with steam heat, and it smelled like the particular combination of things that a newborn brings into a space, that impossible to describe warmth of it, the blankets and the powder and the overwhelming aliveness of a brand new person. He had not known it would smell like anything particular. That detail had not been in any of the 12 books. He stood there in the dark and swayed his son and thought about the version of himself from 6 months ago, the man at the dinner table at Aurelius in the navy suit Vanessa had picked out, doing everything right and feeling nothing much in particular. He tried to locate something sympathetic about that version of himself and found that he could see the shape of how a person gets there, the long accumulation of prioritizing the legible over the real, the measurable over the meaningful, until you have built a life that looks exactly like success and functions exactly like an absence. He did not miss that version of himself. He was tired in a way that version of himself had never been, and he was also, in some way that resisted the vocabulary of his professional life, more awake than he had ever been. James went quiet. His eyes, which were still doing their unfocused best, had gone heavy at the corners. Damien kept swaying anyway, long past when the motion was strictly necessary, because the books had been correct about this, at least, that there is something in the holding that is not just for the baby, and that admitting this does not make a person weak, it makes them honest. He held his son until the steam heat clicked, and the February dark outside the window started doing its slow, reluctant concession toward morning, and he stood there and breathed and did not think about the quarterly reports, or the contractor in the Bronx, or the deal in Denver, or any of the architecture of a life that had been, until recently, the whole of what he was. He thought about 7 pounds, about dark hair, about the weight of something real. Go on. The rhythm of things established itself over the following weeks, the way rhythms do when two adults are trying to coordinate around an infant who has no interest in coordination, imperfectly, with friction, with the occasional evening where the plan collapsed entirely and was replaced by improvisation and cold takeout eaten standing at her kitchen counter. He was there 3 or 4 nights a week, sometimes 5. Never by announcement or standing arrangement. That had been Claire's condition from the beginning, stated plainly, I'm not scheduling you into my life like a meeting. You come when it makes sense, and you go when you need to. He had accepted this because it was reasonable, and because the alternative, installing himself in some fixed pattern that served his need for structure rather than her need for autonomy, was exactly the thing he was working against. He was not perfect at this. There was a Thursday in mid-March when he arrived without texting first, because he had been nearby and thought it would be fine, and it was not fine. She had just gotten James down after a 2-hour battle, she was still in the clothes she had slept in, and the look on her face when she opened the door was the specific look of a woman whose last remaining boundary has been casually disregarded by the one person who knew it was there. I texted, he said. You texted from the lobby. That's technically Damien. He went home. He texted a genuine apology from his car. Not the managed kind, not the strategic kind, just, I'm sorry. That was thoughtless. I'll do better. 3 sentences. He did not try to explain or contextualize or build a case for why it had not been as bad as it seemed. She texted back 40 minutes later. James had a good night. He did something with his face that might have been a smile, but probably wasn't yet. I'll send you a picture. The picture arrived at 11:15. James, in the crib with the recessed hardware, making an expression that was almost certainly gas, but looked in the specific way of new parents who are desperate to find personality and reflex, like skeptical amusement. Damien looked at the picture for a long time before putting his phone down. He was learning the difference between showing up and barging in. It was a slow lesson. He did not always pass the test on the first attempt, but he took the correction each time without turning it into a conflict. And he adjusted, and he tried again, and gradually, very gradually, over weeks that accumulated into months, The texture of things between them began to change. Not dramatically, not in the way of stories where a single moment of clarity reverses years of damage. More like the slow return of feeling to a limb that has been asleep, uncomfortable, incremental, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Ray noticed in April. They were at the diner, still the standing Thursday lunch, though Thursdays now meant Damien arrived, having already been at Claire's apartment in the morning for the early feeding, so he came to the diner with formula on his shirt approximately 60% of the time, and Ray had stopped commenting on this. "Something's different," Ray said. "I have formula on my collar." "Not that, with you." Ray studied him across the table. "You're less—" He searched for the word. "You're less like a man who is doing a thing and more like a man who is just in his life." Damien considered this. "I don't know if that's true yet," he said. "That's fair, but it's the direction." Damien cut his eggs. He thought about how to say the thing he had been carrying for a few weeks, the thing that felt too early and possibly too fragile to name out loud. "She let me put James to bed last Tuesday," he said, "on my own. She went to sleep at 8 and she didn't come out to check. He stopped. "She left us alone in the room." Ray didn't say anything, just looked at him. "That's the first time," Damien said, "since he was born, that she's been in a different room and not monitoring. I know what that means to you. I don't know that I knew how much I needed it until it happened." Ray picked up his coffee. He had the look of someone who is going to say something he means and is choosing the shape of it carefully. "She's testing and trusting at the same time," Ray said. "That's what people do when they've been hurt by someone and they're deciding whether to extend something again. They don't do it all at once. They do it in increments, and they watch what you do with each increment, and if you're careful with it, they give you a little more." He looked at his mug. "Margaret did that with me after I forgot her father's surgery. You remember that." Damien remembered. It had been bad. 3 months of increments, Ray said, before she just treated me normally again, without the watching. He looked up. "It takes as long as it takes. The only wrong answer is getting impatient with the process." Damien nodded. He thought about patience, about the ways it had never been a natural quality in him, the ways he had always moved at the speed of his own decision-making without pausing to let other people's timelines run alongside his. He thought about how much of his marriage had been conducted at that speed, how much of Claire's unhappiness had lived in the gap between his pace and what she actually needed. He was learning to pace himself by someone else's clock. It was genuinely one of the most difficult things he had ever done, and he was beginning to understand, sitting in a diner on a Thursday in April with formula on his collar, that the difficulty was not evidence that something was wrong. It was evidence that something was real. Bes. Spring arrived the way it does in that city, abruptly, with conviction, as if it had decided to make a point. The trees on Claire's block went from bare to provisional green over the course of about a week in late April, and the afternoon light started staying long enough to matter, and the particular quality of the air changed in a way that Damien had always noticed, and never slowed down enough to appreciate. He noticed it now because James noticed everything, or seemed to, or at least responded to everything, turning his face toward light and sound with the completely unguarded openness of someone for whom the world was still entirely new and entirely astonishing. He was nearly 2 months old, and he had already become the most interesting person Damien had ever met. This was not a thing Damien would have predicted himself saying, even 3 months ago. He would have heard it from another father and categorized it as the kind of sentiment that parents feel obligated to perform. But James had developed, in the specific, miraculous way of infants who have no awareness of development, who are just being themselves and leaving adults to be staggered by it, a face that did things. Expressions that were real now, no longer reflex, emerging from somewhere internal and unmistakable. He had started smiling. The first real one, not gas, not muscle movement, but an actual response to something, to Damien's face 2 feet away, making whatever ridiculous expression he had been making, had happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late April, and it had done something to Damien's chest that the 12 books could not have prepared him for. He had looked up at Claire immediately because the reflex when something extraordinary happens is to find someone to share it with, and she had been watching from the kitchen doorway with her coffee and the expression of someone who had already seen it and wanted to see it again through someone else's eyes. "There it is," she said. I know." She was smiling too. Not her managed smile, not the professional one or the guarded one. The real one, the one he had seen rarely during their marriage and not at all during the divorce, and occasionally now, when James did something that overwhelmed her defenses. "Does he do that a lot?" Damien asked. "He started yesterday. He did it at Mrs. Okafor 3 times, and she nearly cried." Damien looked back at James, who was now staring at the ceiling with complete equanimity, the smile already gone, on to the next thing. "That's the most... I don't have a word for that," Damien said. "I know," Claire said. "I know." She came and sat on the floor beside him, close enough to be next to him, with James on the playmat between them, and they sat there in the afternoon light watching their son conduct his very important examination of the ceiling. Not touching, not particularly close, but side by side, without the careful maintenance of distance that had characterized the early months. And in the absence of that distance, there was something present that Damien had not allowed himself to name. They sat there for a while. "I got a call this week," Claire said, not looking at him. "From Stern and Holloway, the environmental firm." He knew the firm. He did not say so. "They have an opening. Not entry level. They do a fellowship track for people coming back to the field after a gap." She paused. "It's part-time to start. 4 days a week." "That's good." "I haven't said yes yet." "Why not?" She picked up one of James's toys, a cloth square with different textures on each side, and turned it over in her hands. "Because I've been making decisions mostly based on what's manageable since he was born, not based on what I actually want." A pause, and I wasn't sure what to do with the difference. He thought about what to say. He thought about the line, the one between offering and controlling, between being present and being a problem solver, between support and management. He had been learning it for months, and he still didn't always find it on the first try. "What do you want?" he asked. She looked at the toy. "I want to go back to work," she said. "I want to use my degree. I want James to see me doing something I care about." She put the toy down. "I want to be more than someone who is surviving." "Then say yes." She looked at him. "I can adjust my schedule," he said. "Whatever days you need, I can be here. That's not me fixing something. That's what I'm here for." He met her eyes. "Say yes to the thing you want. Let me cover the mornings." She looked at him for a long moment. The inventory, the assessment, but different now than it had been in November. Not the look of someone checking a claim against a history of disappointments. The look of someone who has been accumulating a different kind of evidence and is finally allowing it to shift the balance. "Okay," she said. James made a sound. They both looked at him. He had gotten hold of the cloth toy and was engaged in the very serious project of getting it into his mouth, which was not yet working, and he had the expression of a person who is frustrated but undeterred. "He's so stubborn," Claire said. "I wonder where he gets that." She looked at him sideways. "Don't," she said. But the corner of her mouth moved. Indeed, she started at Stern and Holloway in May. She came home the first day with the specific energy of someone who has been reintroduced to a part of themselves they had put in storage, bright-eyed in a way that had nothing to do with Damien or James or any of the previous months. Just her own competence, her own purpose, reminding her what it felt like. She told him about it over the phone while he had James, who was engaged in his current project of learning what his hands were and what they were for. "There's a case they're working on," she said, "a wetlands violation. Industrial runoff about 40 miles north of the city. My supervisor today basically described the legal strategy and then looked at me and said, 'What would you do?' Just like that. First day. 'What did you say?' I told her." She paused. "She wrote it down." He smiled at his phone. James grabbed his finger at that moment, that strong, total grip of an infant, the one that had nothing behind it except pure biological determination. And Damien looked down at his son holding his hand and felt the doubling of the moment, the two things at once. "Good," he said. "You should be doing that. You were always good at it." A pause on the line. "You never told me that," she said, not with accusation, with the simple honesty she had always brought to things. He thought about it. She was right. He had known, during their marriage, that she was exceptional at her work. He had seen her dissect arguments and identify pressure points with the kind of instinctive clarity that took other people years to develop. And he had felt proud of it, in some vague background way, while never actually saying so. Another thing that had lived in the gap between what he knew and what he expressed. "I should have," he said. "I'm saying it now." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." And then back to the practical. "James ate at 5? "Yes." He made a face about it. He always makes a face. He makes that face and then eats the whole thing. He's dramatic. She said it with the affectionate exasperation of someone who is describing a trait they find equal parts maddening and wonderful. Damien looked at his son, who was still holding his finger with total commitment. "Yeah," he said. "He really is." The afternoon at the park happened on a Saturday in early June, when the city had finally decided it was summer and was committed to the decision. Full sun, the particular gold of late afternoon, the trees on the park's edge fully green, people everywhere with the specific loosened quality that a city produces on its first genuinely warm Saturday of the year. It had been Claire's idea. She had a blanket and a bag with more supplies than any 3-month-old required, and Damien carried James in the carrier he had researched for 2 weeks and was now completely competent with. And they walked the 6 blocks to the park in the afternoon light like 2 adults who had learned to be alongside each other without it being complicated. They were not together. This was still true, and they both knew it and had not tried to name it as anything other than what it was. 2 people building something functional and honest that did not yet have a category in the standard vocabulary. Not co-parents in the administrative sense. Not friends exactly, not whatever they had been when they were married, which had not been enough of the right things. Something else. Something that was still being defined by each individual choice made over each individual day. He spread the blanket while Claire adjusted the sunshade on the stroller that she had brought as a backup. James was in the carrier, against Damien's chest, looking out at the park with the wide-eyed focus of someone encountering this much open space and light for the first time. "He's going to fall asleep," Claire said, sitting on the blanket. "He's not going to fall asleep. He's too interested in everything. He always looks interested right before he falls asleep. It's his tell." She was right. Within 10 minutes, James's head had tipped forward slightly, the specific angle of an infant surrendering to sleep while pretending otherwise. Damien sat down on the blanket beside Claire. He unlatched the carrier carefully, keeping the position, the way he had learned. James slept on. They sat in the afternoon light and said nothing for a while, and the nothing was comfortable in a way that the nothing between them had not been for a long time. Maybe had never been, because even in the good years of the marriage there had been something under the quiet, some unaddressed thing humming at low frequency. He had not noticed it then. He noticed its absence now. "I've been thinking," Claire said. He waited. "About the apartment." She looked at the park. A couple throwing a frisbee, children at the playground on the far side, a man walking 3 dogs with the focused authority of someone who has given his life to this. "It's too small. I knew it when I moved in and I told myself it was temporary, and then I stopped having the energy to make it temporary." She paused. "Stern and Holloway is salaried. It's not what I was making before the marriage, but it's enough to do something about the apartment. There's a building on Clement Street," he said. 2-bedroom, 2-bath. The 2nd bedroom is small, but it's there. I was going to mention it." She looked at him. "I own the building," he said. And before she could get to the next sentence, "I'm not offering it to you. I'm telling you about it because it's available and it's 3 blocks from where you are now. The rental price is market rate. I will not be involved in your tenancy beyond the fact that my name is on the deed, and we can have a lawyer draft something that makes that clear if you need it to be clear." She studied him. "You own the building," she said. "I've owned it for 4 years. I looked it up when you mentioned the apartment was too small. I'm not—" He stopped. "I'm not trying to insert myself into your finances. I'm telling you because it's a good apartment and you should know it's available. What you do with that is entirely up to you." A long pause. "Market rate," she said. "Market rate." She looked at the park again. He could see her doing the calculation, the one that was not about money, or not only about money, but about what it meant to accept a thing from him, and whether accepting it was allowing something or just being practical about a good apartment. I'll look at it, she said finally. No promises. Of course. James stirred slightly against him, resettled, went back to sleep. The Frisbee couple had gotten their Frisbee stuck in a tree and were working through their respective strategies for retrieving it with the specific energy of two people who disagreed about the right approach. Claire watched them for a moment. They're going to be there a while, she said. The tall one is about to throw something at it to knock it loose. That's going to make it worse? Almost certainly. The tall one threw something at the Frisbee. The Frisbee moved 3 inches deeper into the tree. The other one said something with the unmistakable body language of, I told you. Claire laughed. It was the laugh he had first heard in February, in the nursery, when he had confessed to owning a book about sleep schedules and reading it twice. The genuine one, involuntary before she could catch it. But this time she did not catch it. This time she let it run its natural course, and it was not short. He looked at her. At Claire, who was laughing at strangers and their Frisbee problem on a Saturday afternoon in June, with James asleep against his chest and the city moving around them in the full, indifferent way of cities that contain thousands of stories simultaneously and know the weight of none of them. He thought about the restaurant, the crossed eyes over a dining room, the side door at 1047, the cold sidewalk, her back to him, his voice saying her name. He thought about all of it, the months, the increments, the unreasonable chair, and the white noise machine, and the assembled crib, and the 12 books, and the formula on his collar, and the appointments, and the drives, and the waiting in the parking lot until she was safely through the door. He thought about the morning James arrived and the way she had watched him from the hospital bed, the inventory running one final time, and then the decision, quiet, unannounced, provisional but real, to leave the door open. He thought about what Ray had said at the diner, about credit, about depositing without watching for the balance to change. He did not know what this was, the thing between them, in the June afternoon in the park. He did not have a clean word for it, and he had stopped looking for one. It was something they were building a day at a time with the unspectacular materials of showing up and telling the truth and adjusting when they got it wrong and not walking away when it was hard. He thought it was probably the most real thing he had ever built. It did not look like he had expected success to look. It was better. James made a sound against his chest, a small, inquiring sound, the sound of someone who had been asleep and was now reconsidering. He stirred, and his face scrunched, and then it did the thing that had started in April and had not stopped, and that Damien knew, intellectually, was a developing neurological capacity and not a response to him specifically, but that landed every single time like a response to him specifically. James opened his eyes and found Damien's face and smiled. Not gas, not reflex, just his son, looking at him with the complete undefended openness of someone who had no armor yet and had not learned the need for it, because every time he had opened his eyes in his 3 months of existence, someone had been there. Hey, Damien said, quietly, the same word, the same way, as the first time. James kept smiling. Claire had gone still beside him. He glanced at her. She was looking at James, at the smile, with the expression that was hers alone, the wrecked and whole expression, the one he had first seen in the delivery room and had been watching build into something more settled, more practiced, more hers over 3 months of doing this. Then she looked at Damien, just for a moment. He looked back. There was no plan in it, no architecture, no performance for an audience, just two imperfect people in a park on a June afternoon, looking at each other with their history between them and something unresolved and something real, and the small, complete person they had made together lying against his father's chest and smiling at a sky that was nothing but blue. Dad? James did not say, because he was 3 months old and weeks away from that, but he reached. He lifted his arm with the unfocused, total commitment of an infant who has decided something and reaches for it without strategy or doubt, and his small hand found the front of Damien's shirt and held on. Damien put his hand over his son's. Neither of them said anything. The park moved around them, the Frisbee couple finally victorious, the dogs walking their patient man in circles, the afternoon light doing its slow work across the grass, and the city went on being the city, vast and usual and entirely indifferent to the small, ordinary, extraordinary thing happening on a blanket near the East Path, where a man who had spent his life leaving had learned, slowly and imperfectly and not without cost, to stay. Checked. There is a version of this story where everything resolves cleanly, where the man becomes new overnight and the woman forgives completely, and they look at each other across a hospital room or a park blanket and understand that the past is past and the future is clear. That version is easier to tell. This is the version where Damien Cross still sometimes moves too fast, and still sometimes solves problems that weren't his to solve, and still sometimes has to go back to the car and sit for a moment before he has access to the version of himself that has learned something. Where Claire still sometimes watches him with the inventory running, still sometimes needs to say the true hard thing out loud before she can let it go. Where they are not together, not in the old sense, not yet, maybe not ever in that exact way, but are building something that does not have a name yet and does not need one. Where James grows up knowing his father's face and his mother's laugh, and the specific combination of those two people who are neither enemies nor lovers but something more durable than either. Two adults who chose, repeatedly and without guarantee of outcome, to show up for a person who needed them to. The real story is always the one without the clean resolution. It's the one where the change is slow and the cost is real and the progress is invisible most of the time, visible only in accumulation. In the 43 drives, the unreasonable chair, the assembled crib, the Tuesday nights and Thursday mornings, and Saturday afternoons that become, eventually, the shape of a life. Damien Cross did not become a perfect man. He became a more honest one. He became a man who understood, in the specific way you understand things that have cost you something, that presence is not a gesture you make once when it matters. It is a practice. It is the 1,000 small, unglamorous choices made in the absence of applause, in the rooms where no one is watching, in the middle of the night when the white noise machine isn't working and the only thing your infant needs is for you to be there and keep swaying. He was not the man he had been the night he walked into Aurelius in a suit that Vanessa picked out and performed his own life over overpriced food in a room full of people doing the same. He was tired and present, and occasionally had formula on his collar, and he had read more about infant sleep schedules than any of his business school professors would have predicted. And he was, in the ways that turned out to actually count, exactly where he was supposed to be. And James, who held on to shirt collars with total conviction and smiled at ceilings and had his father's stubbornness, as Claire had said, and his mother's honesty, which was already visible in the way he regarded the world with complete unfiltered response to whatever it offered him. James was growing up knowing the answer to the only question that had ever actually mattered. Not whether his father was successful, not whether his father was powerful or wealthy or 3 moves ahead in every room he walked into. Whether his father was there. He was there. He was always there. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in the end, the only thing that ever was.